The Russian arms industry used to be considered among the best in the world. Among its achievements were the AK-47 assault rifle, the T-90 tank, the MiG-29 fighter jet, and the S-400 air defense system, all of which, at one point, were considered among the leaders in their categories. For a long time, it seemed that Russian arms would have a permanent place on the global stage, never as the absolute best option available, but always as a cost-effective alternative to more expensive Western tech that could still get the job done. But then, Russia invaded Ukraine, and everything changed. 10 years before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Russian arms exports were booming, with total sales amounting to over $8 billion per year. These arms sales provided Russia with significant income, but perhaps more importantly, they also helped offset the cost of weapons research and development, which allowed Russia to fund the production of an advancing modern arsenal using the pocketbooks of other nations. But within the first 2 years of fighting in Ukraine, Russian arms exports had collapsed by nearly 2/3, from over $8 billion to less than $3 billion per year. And all signs indicate that they're now on track to drop much lower for the foreseeable future. Some argue that this decline in arms sales could simply be because Russia is temporarily bogged down by their war in Ukraine, and therefore doesn't have excess military stock to export. But while that reasoning seems to make some sense, on closer analysis, the issues go far deeper than that, and they are quite catastrophic for Russia. You see, Russia isn't just failing to deliver on its current weapons contracts, it's also failing to secure future contracts, and that's indicative of a far more systemic collapse. For example, in 2023, Russia only managed to export arms to 12 countries, a massive drop from the 31 countries it was exporting to in 2019, which was already heavily reduced from 60 countries in the early 2010s. This means that since invading Ukraine, Russia hasn't just failed to deliver arms in the short term, but has also lost many of its most reliable customers. And those customers probably aren't coming back. If anything, they're drawing further and further away. Notably, during this period of immense global strife, when most countries were trying to stock up on more weapons, these former customers didn't stop buying arms. They simply stopped buying them from Russia. In the process, these countries obviously turned to other suppliers. And it turns out that these new suppliers, generally speaking, are Russia's geopolitical opponents, especially France. And globally, massive efforts are now underway to re-platform off of Russian systems and onto Western systems, much to Russia's dismay. This shift has obvious implications for Russia, but it also has less obvious ones, as Russia is losing the global leverage that once came largely from its monopoly on arms exports in certain regions of the world. Now, if a World War III type scenario were ever to break out, that means there are going to be a lot of major countries that used to be dependent on Russian arms, who are now going to be dependent on the West instead. And that means a lot more to Russia than just a couple of rubles and lost weapons sales profits. Potentially, there could be dozens of countries that might have fought on Russia's side before, but who now almost certainly would not, instead choosing to remain neutral or perhaps even side with the West. After all, these countries certainly couldn't fight against the West while being dependent on them for things like ammunition, spare parts, or repair technicians. And while a World War III scenario may not be likely, it is still these types of shifts that impact geopolitical calculus, extending to create more practical and predictable impacts on power dynamics, and helping to decide control over trade, economic alliances, and more. When making the choice to switch away from Russian weapons and onto Western ones, these are the major and conscious considerations. And so the shift away from Russian weapons is a strong international signal of the direction that the unaligned world is currently moving. Perhaps a stronger signal than just about any other, despite bold claims by Russia and China that they will one day somehow manage to unseat the dollar, and with it, Western influence. This shift isn't always because these nations are operating out of the goodness of their hearts, though, or because they want to be on the right side of history. More often, it's simply a practical move being made by nations who want power for themselves in their regions of the world, and who know that relying on Russian weapons is no longer a feasible path to achieving that power. But how did we get here? How has Russia's weapons industry fallen so far, so fast, taking so much of Russia's global influence with it?
Before we get into that, the only reason we're able to create this content is thanks to our sponsors. For those who don't know me, my name is Paul Warburg, and I'm the creator behind the Icarus project. That's right, sorry to the Russian trolls in the comments, but this channel is not created by AI or by the FBI, or the CIA for that matter. And since our state sponsors are lacking, we're glad to be able to take real sponsors to keep this content flowing for you guys. Today's sponsor is Manscaped, and they come just in time as we enter the holiday season. Now I know what you're probably thinking. When you look at a guy as handsome as myself, you're probably thinking, man, that guy has it all together. But actually, I don't. My entire adult life, I have been shaving with a regular plastic razor. I guess this one's actually bamboo. Not realizing what I was doing to myself. But recently, I discovered how amazing it is to actually shave with a proper electric razor. Thanks to Manscaped, who sent me this Chairman Pro for today's video. It was my first ever shave with no razor burn. I didn't even realize I had razor burn in the first place. But after my first shave, I noticed a noticeable difference in my skin quality. And so did my wife for that matter. She was like, yeah, that's what happens when you actually take care of your skin. We shave literally all the time. So why not have it be a good experience? So gentlemen, do yourself a favor and check it out at manscaped.com. And as a special bonus, if you use our code Icarus, you'll get 20% off and free shipping at checkout. Thanks again to Manscaped for sponsoring today's episode. Now back to the video.
The war in Ukraine should have been a big marketing campaign for Russia's military, an opportunity to show the world how formidable and capable Russian tech really was. If Russia had pulled off a swift, decisive victory, it would have been an arms dealer's dream, a chance to showcase Russia's hardware as superior, reliable, powerful, and now importantly, battle-proven, letting them charge a premium for previously untested equipment. But instead, the result was just the opposite. Russian arms suffered a catastrophic PR disaster. When I was a kid, I remember people talking about Russian arms as formidable and respectable, myself included. But now, whenever people talk about Russian arms, it's almost always in the context of a joke. Like how Russian warships are so good, they can instantly transform into submarines. Or how the war in Ukraine is going so badly for Russia that even their missiles want to return home. On a practical level then, Russia's current problem can be summed up in this way. People used to only see Russian tanks when they were being paraded down Moscow's streets, or when they were being portrayed in blockbuster movies accomplishing impossible feats like invading the mainland United States. And these portrayals helped Russia secure lucrative arms contracts, making dictators feel cozy in Russia's corner of the world. But now, the world is seeing these same tanks in real life being picked off one after another, their turrets flying off so frequently that by some estimates, they're now getting more airtime than the entire Russian Air Force. Or at least that's what was happening before Russia basically ran out of them. So predictably, instead of increasing Russia's revenues, now every time a Russian tank is shown on a television set, it causes Russian weapons exports to collapse even further. Of course, back home, Russia still tries to act like this isn't happening. Domestic headlines often paint a rosy picture of a resurgent Russian defense industry, showing Russian factories working around the clock to meet the needs of a long war. And even in many media outlets in the West, people are swallowing this story. The numbers, at first, sound impressive. Russia is churning out artillery shells at a pace that outstrips Western efforts, more than 250,000 shells a month. And Russia's defense budget has swollen to the highest levels since the Soviet Union collapsed, with military expenditure expected to be around $600 billion between 2022 and 2025. With this huge expenditure, the expectation is that Russia should have a lot to show for itself, with more capability than Ukraine can manage. Eventually, the story goes, Ukraine will collapse under the pressure, as the Kremlin proudly claims gains in drone, tank, and missile production. However, these claims are questionable, to say the least. For example, if Russia's military production is so amazing, why are they still importing a large bulk of their artillery shells from North Korea? Especially when those North Korean artillery shells have a reputation of, quite literally, blowing up in the faces of the soldiers attempting to use them. And further, if Russia's military production is doing so well, why do satellite photos prove that Russia's Soviet-era scrapyards are now running low on old equipment, like tanks and armored vehicles, which are being hastily refurbished by the Russian military and pushed out to the battlefield as substitutes for new equipment. Many more examples could be cited, but suffice it to say, the reality that can be seen, witnessed, and observed on the battlefield doesn't line up with the exaggerated numbers showing up in Russian news headlines that can't be verified. It's obvious why Russia has to portray its weapons industry as world-class to the people back home. But for anyone who cares to look further than that, it's clear that despite the Kremlin's facade, Russia's weapons are failing to deliver on the battlefield, both literally and figuratively. Literally, because those weapons often aren't arriving on time, if they arrive at all. And figuratively, because when they do arrive, they're often in such bad shape that they only have a fraction of their intended capability. For example, we've already mentioned the tanks that eliminate their crews when damaged, due to serious design flaws. This makes them not only ineffective in Ukraine, but also ineffective at convincing onlooking nations to place further orders, for obvious reasons. But inferior tanks are hardly the only problem Russia is facing. Just as bad, their helicopters are developing a nasty habit of crashing without even taking fire. And Russian missiles have often failed to explode when making contact with their targets, something that's made even worse by the fact that Russian missiles are so inaccurate that making contact with their targets isn't even a given in the first place. In fact, during the first month of the war, Russian missiles experienced failure rates between 20% and 60%. As the world observed this phenomenon, demand for Russian missiles and Russian aircraft around the globe fell out of the sky. Pun intended. The same quality problems span across almost every category of Russian weapons, from drones to fighter jets. Take the Sukhoi Su-57 fighter jet, for example, Russia's supposed answer to the American F-35. Marketed as a fifth-generation stealth fighter, it was meant to be a symbol of Russian aerospace dominance. Yet, over 20 years after the project began, only a handful of Su-57s have been produced, just 32 as of December 2023, with 10 of those 32 being test aircraft. In contrast, the US has produced over 1,000 F-35s, actively deploying them across the globe in various theaters of operation. Because, unlike the Su-57, those suckers actually work as intended. Those Su-57s that have made it to the sky have been plagued by technical issues. The first serial production Su-57 crashed during a test flight in 2019. And this is a trend the world has also seen with many of Russia's other so-called modern battle-ready superweapons. It turns out, there is a massive gap between Russia's ambitions on paper and its actual capabilities on the ground. And in reality, many Russian weapons are being serialized out of the testing phase, not because they're actually ready for prime-time action, but because Russia needs to project fully developed capabilities on paper to keep the outside world scared, and the people at home confident. The Russian military's lack of proper modernization is also particularly evident in their armored vehicle fleet. Many of the tanks deployed in Ukraine, such as the T-72 and T-80 models, are decades-old designs that have seen only minimal upgrades. These older models, the only ones Russia has been able to field in battle in significant numbers, are markedly inferior to modern Western tanks like the American M1 Abrams or the German Leopard 2, both of which feature advanced armor, superior fire control systems, and enhanced mobility that make them far more effective on the battlefield. For example, during the Gulf War in the 1990s, at the Battle of 73 Easting, an outnumbered American-led coalition of armored vehicles, centered around the M1 Abrams tank, defeated a much larger group of Iraqi armor that was centered around the T-72. During the battle, the Iraqis lost around 160 tanks, along with 180 armored personnel carriers, while the American coalition lost 0 tanks and just 1 armored vehicle. The battle ended up resulting in around 1,000 Iraqi casualties, and an additional 1,000 Iraqi soldiers captured as prisoners of war, while on the American side there were just 6 killed and 19 wounded. Since this famous battle between the M1 Abrams and the T-72, the M1 has been heavily enhanced, while many of the T-72s Russia has been using in Ukraine have seen no upgrades at all during the same period of time. In fact, many of these were in storage even before the Battle of 73 Easting, and yet were still pulled out and sent to the front lines when Russia ran low on armor. And even Russia's newer, more advanced models, like the T-90, have struggled against Western-supplied weaponry, with Russia already losing over 100 out of an estimated supply of a little under 200 total. As for Russia's much-hyped T-14 Armata tank, which was supposed to be Russia's next-generation main battle tank, so far, it hasn't even managed to be deployed in Ukraine, aside from a few rumored low-risk appearances, with production delays and technical issues keeping it out of the conflict. One has to wonder if Russia is intentionally keeping this tank from seeing battle, out of fears that its capabilities too would be shown to be inferior, leaving Russia with no remaining propaganda chips to play on the tank front. Perhaps this could be because the T-14 is suspected to suffer from the same fatal flaw as the older Russian tanks, which have proven to be no match for modern anti-tank weapons like the American Javelin or the British In-Law, which have been used to devastating effect by Ukrainian forces. If true, that would make the T-14 nothing more than a more expensive target for Ukraine to destroy. And nobody wants the whole world watching when their pride and joy gets absolutely humiliated by the In-Laws. Jokes aside, tanks are hardly the only expensive Russian systems being destroyed on the battlefield. These types of issues also apply to Russian air defense systems, which have been a major liability for them, leading to the early retirements of several Russian generals and other high-ranking officers. In Ukraine, Russia has been using systems like the S-300 and S-400. The S-400 in particular costs over $500 million and was once considered among the best air defense systems in the world, bringing in lucrative arms contracts for Russia. However, this was before the systems were actually tested by the rigors of war. Now, these systems have been proven to be vulnerable to modern countermeasures, and even simple cheap rockets, the kind of things the systems were specifically designed to help defend against. Rather than being shot out of the air, these rockets have instead found themselves smashing Russia's $500 million investments for pennies on the dollar. Come on guys, you literally had one job. The situation, of course, is no better at sea. Russia's Black Sea Fleet, which was supposed to dominate the waters around Ukraine, since Ukraine itself did not have its own navy to counter it, has instead been repeatedly humiliated, to the point that it is now officially considered operationally obsolete. And the fact that Ukraine, a country with no significant navy, was able to inflict such damage speaks volumes about the state of the Russian military as a whole. Part of the reason things have gotten so bad is because of rampant corruption in the Russian military, where military contracts are often awarded based on political connections rather than competence. While the West has embraced innovation and private sector competition to drive advances in military technology, Russia's defense sector remains a state-run monopoly, with companies like Rostec, which controls hundreds of defense firms, being run by former KGB operatives and political appointees rather than by engineers or industry experts. The result is a bloated, inefficient system where funds are siphoned off, quality control is non-existent, and innovation is stifled. As the war in Ukraine is exposed, the production of weapons has often been more about meeting quotas on paper than actually producing reliable, battle-ready equipment. Operating in a panic to try to plug some of the holes created by the systemic corruption, Russia has been turning to increasingly desperate countermeasures. To keep defense plants operational, convicts have been brought in, often with little training, as the Kremlin tries to make up for labor shortages. And these labor shortages are only likely to get worse as Ukraine increasingly targets Russian production facilities, making regular civilians afraid to go to work at these jobs. What's more, the workers that are there are being pushed to the brink, with 6-day work weeks and 12-hour shifts becoming the norm. The result is a workforce that is underqualified, unmotivated, exhausted, and unable to produce the high-quality equipment that modern warfare demands. And even worse, these workers don't have much to work with in the first place. Many people don't realize that, despite years of Kremlin rhetoric about self-sufficiency, Russia's defense industry still relies heavily on imported components, particularly for advanced electronics and guidance systems. In fact, a report by the Royal United Services Institute found that Russia's military is dependent on thousands of Western-made components in particular, components which, for obvious reasons, have become increasingly difficult for Russia to source as the war has progressed. With Western sanctions cutting Russia off, Russia has been forced to turn to the black market and to countries like Iran and North Korea for substitutes. This has helped fill some of their need, but certainly not all of it, and the quality of these substitutes is questionable at best. So as could be expected, many of the tanks, missiles, and armored vehicles rolling off Russian assembly lines are increasingly poorly constructed, rushed through production with little regard for quality control. After all, who needs quality when your gear is almost guaranteed to be destroyed on first contact with the enemy anyways? This is not only a problem for Russia's own military, but also for any nation still hoping to buy Russian arms. Because if this is the case for the arms Russia is producing for their own use on the battlefield, the issues will only be worse for arms intended for foreign export, and countries are taking notice of the increasingly high risk of receiving substandard or unreliable equipment if they continue to do business with Russia. This has led to a few recent, high-profile moves. Turkey recently moved away from purchasing Russia's S-400 air defense system, choosing to purchase Western alternatives instead, with Russia losing $500 million in revenue for each lost sale. India, which has historically been one of Russia's largest arms buyers, has placed orders for Western aircraft, abandoning Russian alternatives in favor of more reliable options. And even Serbia, once a loyal Russian arms customer and ideological ally, has started talks to acquire Western military equipment after witnessing Russia's failures in Ukraine. As we said earlier, nations that once depended on Russia for their security are no longer willing to take that risk. And the end result is that Russia is not just losing customers and revenue, it's also losing its strategic influence, its credibility, and its standing as a global power. In fact, it's not just losing those things, it's already lost them. And even if they still manage to squeeze out a victory in Ukraine, these systemic changes won't be swinging back in Russia's favor anytime soon. After all, countries who have just trained their militaries on new Western platforms aren't going to be in any hurry to re-platform again, even if Russia did somehow manage to fix all of its underlying issues. In short, the arms industry was once a cornerstone of Russia's geopolitical strategy, and a means of projecting power and binding allies to its sphere of influence. But that cornerstone is crumbling, and with it, so too is Russia's ability to shape global affairs. For more on this topic, be sure to check out our other video, Russia is literally running out of everything, or check out the other video on screen instead.